A victory for common sense. These are the words of House Republican leader Kevin McCarthy following a recent bipartisan decision in Congress. As of today, the Armed Services Committee in the House and the Senate have voted to repeal the COVID-19 vaccination mandate in the 2023 defense bill. Against the recommendation of Joe Biden, Democrats and Republicans vote to remove the highly controversial command, and the timing is unsurprising. Several states are expressing concern about meeting military enlistment requirements, and the vaccine mandate is an important variable in this equation. McCarthy had this to say, quote, "The end of President Biden's military COVID vaccine mandate is a victory for our military and for common sense," end quote. McCarthy continued by saying, quote, "While I applaud the end of this onerous mandate, the Biden administration must go further." The House Minority Leader, who's expected to be Speaker of the House, is alluding to the servicemen and women who have been fired in previous years for refusing the vaccine. In an effort to achieve justice for them, congressional Republicans plan to prioritize this matter once they gain full control of the House in January. McCarthy says, quote, "The new House Republican majority will finally hold the Biden administration accountable," end quote. Furthermore, their goal is to assist the men and women in uniform who were unfairly targeted by this administration. So thankfully, our troops have people such as Davis Younts, who dedicated 10 years to legally representing and advocating for our soldiers as a military defense attorney. Younts also worked as the chief of the Military Justice Division at the U.S. Air Force JAG School. Today, Younts continues to serve those who serve us. Joining us now to discuss is the man himself, military defense attorney Davis Younts. Thanks for being here tonight, Davis.
Hey, good evening. Thanks for covering this important issue.
Great. So do you think, though, some of these celebrations over the dropping of the mandate may be a bit too premature?
Well, that's a great question. Listen, this is a huge step. This is something we've been fighting for over a year now. And I just want to say thank you to senators like Ron Johnson, Rand Paul, congressmen like Thomas Massie and Chip Roy. They've been fighting this fight with us, and they've done a great job. So this is a first step, but it is not over. It's absolutely unclear what's going to happen to the over 10,000 military men and women who've already been discharged, who have adverse service characterizations, who've been punished for their religious freedom. And it's absolutely unclear what's next and what will happen internally with the Department of Defense for those who have already been punished, who've already had their careers stopped, they've been fired as commanders, and they're now waiting processing. So there's a lot more work to do, I fear.
There is, and of course you've represented many of our men and women in uniform who've had to deal with this. And as you've raised the point before that perhaps some people could still be discharged over the fact that they at the time were refusing to follow an order. Do you think that might also be an issue here as well? Another kind of loophole or backdoor to this victory that we seem to have here?
That's right. What the language in the NDAA does is ends the mandate for now. What is unclear is whether or not the Department of Defense is still going to push forward with trying to discharge my clients who are accused of violating a lawful order to receive the mandate. Now, again, we don't believe it's a lawful order. Most of my clients are being punished in violation of the Religious Freedom Restoration Act and are, at least for now, protected by the injunctions in federal court. But it's unclear what the Department of Defense is going to try to do moving forward.
I know a big issue for a long time was the fact that, many of our servicemen and women were feeling that the Pentagon was just kind of rubber stamping these denials, these rejections of their religious freedom objections or other type of conscientious objections they may have to taking the vaccine mandate, that the Pentagon, that the bureaucrats there were not taking the proper time necessary to go through, the ins and the outs of all these different files, instead just reject, reject, reject. Has that still been an issue, or do you think that they've been looking at the matter more closely?
No, unfortunately, it's still an issue. There has been no change, no significant change in policy. So what's happening is the Department of Defense has been violating the Constitution by ignoring the Religious Freedom Restoration Act and simply doing blanket denials without proper justification for all military members who've sought an exemption for a religious accommodation to this vaccine. So that has not changed. Nothing about this language necessarily changes that, and it doesn't overturn the punishment that many of my clients have already received that really is a punishment for their religious faith. And again, I can't emphasize this enough. There's almost 10,000 military members that have already been discharged, countless others who have retired early, or simply not re-enlisted. So just ending the mandate, if we do nothing more, I'm not sure it does a lot to solve the recruiting crisis either.
It just breaks my heart to think of all those people who've had their careers destroyed. I mean, my brother, he recently got out of the Marine Corps himself, and I just know through him a lot of his friends who are still in, how big this is for their careers, to, move up the ranks, and, how much honor and pride that they have to serve this nation. And to have something like this come in and sweep away years of hard work, I mean, it's really hard, to kind of put that together in one's mind. It's very painful, I think, for a lot of people right now. So for some of your clients, have they felt that they've been dealing with any kind of retaliation, would you say, for perhaps for objecting to bending the knee on the mandate, or to even going as far as, attaining legal representation? Have they kind of felt some retaliation for that?
Absolutely, they have. And unfortunately, we could spend a couple of hours talking about all of the examples. I mean, some of the worst are senior leaders who were in command positions who were fired when they submitted a religious accommodation. That's it. That's all they did. Hadn't even been decided on yet. And there are multiple ones. There are military medical providers who looked at service members' military records and said, hey, it's medically not recommended. It's dangerous for someone to take this vaccine at this time based on their medical history. And if they granted that exemption and the Department of Defense thought they were granting too many, their medical licenses and credentials were threatened. And that's even sets aside the issue with whether or not the FDA-approved vaccine has even been available for military members. So people look at me like I'm exaggerating. They look at my clients like I'm exaggerating when I say this is a constitutional crisis. I don't know what else to call it when the Department of Defense is intentionally ignoring federal law with regard to the FDA requirement. You can't mandate experimental products on military members. And by choosing to ignore the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, they've forced individual military members to go into federal court to seek an injunction. That's extraordinary. It hasn't happened too many times in our history. Unfortunately, it did happen with the anthrax vaccine, and this feels like a replay to many of us.
That it does. And I know with this partial victory that we at least do have, some say that maybe Biden won't sign the NDAA just because of it, but it's a must-pass defense bill. I think he probably will end up signing it at the end of the day. But I guess just lastly, before I let you go, tonight, the last minute or so that we have, do you feel that perhaps any of these cases that you have under your belt, that any of them might maybe go up to even the Supreme Court level? Because as you said, this is a big deal. It's something that's driven a huge rift through our nation. There is a lot of constitutional implications. Do you think that may be something heading down the pike?
I think it is entirely possible. What we've seen so far for the Navy case and the Air Force case is victories at the circuit court level. So I think the decisions and the rulings so far giving the injunctions are very, very clear. I'm not sure the DOD really wants to take these cases all the way to the Supreme Court on the religious freedom issue, because I think the violations have been so clear. So we'll see. I'm hoping they start to compensate military members and start to roll this back and perhaps use this victory in legislation as a stepping stone to do that.
Well, Davis, thank you for all that you do on this front, because as you said, it's, there's still a long way to go for a lot of those people who've already suffered because of the mandate. So we have a lot to do, still a lot ahead of us. Thank you for joining us tonight, Davis.
Thank you very much.